Oh, facing the wrong way. There we go. A few weeks ago, I got really badly assaulted at Cygnet Hospital on Nash Ward, which is a PICU. That stands for Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit. Yeah, this fucking psycho bloke just started smacking me in the face in the kitchen like loads of times. Had to go to the Bristol Eye Hospital for retinal and corneal damage assessment, and still got a blurry vision in one eye. And the company Cygnet are cunts, as it says on my hat here. Just did fuck all about it, and then just shipped him out of the hospital as soon as I raised it on YouTube. He was gone within like an hour. I got a call from the police today to say that they're following up the issue and they don't know where he is. And they're going to judge, the Crown Prosecution Service going to judge his sentencing based on whether he was capacitous or not, which is going to be left down to the corrupt psychiatric hospital that I'm in at the moment. So that's a great bit of institutional bias that will probably completely fuck everything up in terms of their investigation, prosecution, and I'd like incarceration of this fellow. If I went out into the street and smacked somebody in the face 25 times, damaged their eyesight and left them swollen and bleeding, covered in hot coffee, then I'd probably expect to be arrested for that. But not here. Not here at Cygnet. Here at Cygnet, they do things differently. They make sure that, you know, the rules aren't followed, and that's why they're cunts. Here's a document I've created, which sort of tells the story. So the GDPR fallacy, obstructing, wait a second, that's way down. It's really long. This is going to take me about 40 minutes to read, but you can sit with me and enjoy the dulcet tones of my voice as I read it. Might have to take a few breaks for vapes. So yeah, chronic failures in clinical custody, an investigative report into the systemic negligence, regulatory breaches and institutional betrayal at British Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit. On the 6th of May, at approximately 4:30 a.m, a severe breach of physical security, clinical safety and human rights occurred within a locked psychiatric intensive care unit, PICU, in England. A detained service user was subjected to a prolonged, violent physical assault by another patient, while the ward staff passively observed the escalation and subsequent beating. Physical injuries sustained by the victim, including a traumatic eye injury requiring emergency transfer to the Bristol Eye Hospital, alongside severe swelling of the face and lips, were matched by catastrophic psychological trauma. An objective investigation into the operational, clinical and administrative actions of the hospital before, during and after the assault reveals a profound breakdown in the institution's duty of care. Rather than protecting a vulnerable detained individual, that's me, the hospital's clinical team and management acted with alarming ineptitude, culminating in an apparent retrospective cover-up. This report provides a detailed narrative of the incident, evaluates the clinical and pharmacological protocols that were ignored, and highlights the specific verbatim statutory, regulatory and professional breaches committed by the hospital and its registered staff. So a locked ward. The narrative of unopposed violence. A psychiatric intensive care unit is designed to be a highly secure, therapeutic environment for patients exhibiting acute, severely disturbed behaviour that cannot be safely managed on a general psychiatric ward. Because patients detained in a PICU are inherently vulnerable and under the absolute control of the hospital's authorities, the institution holds a non-delegable common law and statutory duty of care to protect them from foreseeable harm, exploitation and violence. At 4:30 a.m. on the 6th of May, this protective framework collapsed. The violent escalation began when a male service user became highly aggressive, shouting at the victim, stripping off his shirt and throwing hot coffee directly over them. Despite being the highly visible nature of this escalating behaviour, ward staff stood by and did nothing. Seeking to disengage and de-escalate the situation, the victim attempted to walk away, exiting the communal area and entering the ward kitchen to make a fresh coffee. The aggressor followed him into this enclosed space. This pursuit was witnessed and permitted by the ward staff, who failed to intervene, block the assailant, or implement standard containment protocols. Once inside the kitchen, the assailant trapped and brutally assaulted the victim, punching him in the face approximately 25 times. Throughout this sustained beating, staff failed to physically intervene to rescue the victim. Following the assault, the hospital administration failed to implement immediate safeguarding measures. So instead of segregating or secluding the violent perpetrator, the ward manager relocated the attacker to a bedroom located directly adjacent, next door, it should say, to the traumatised victim's room. This decision forced the victim to reside in the immediate proximity to their attacker, destroying any remaining sense of clinical safety and severely compounding their psychological trauma. The hospital's operational stance shifted from passive neglect to rapid self-preservation only when the victim published a detailed account of the assault on a public YouTube channel. In what presents a smoking gun context of institutional panic, the assailant was abruptly discharged from the facility within 90 minutes of the video being uploaded to the internet. The hospital arranged for the attacker to pack his bags and leave via patient transport, failing to coordinate with the police, who were actively trying to locate him. To compound this failure, the hospital management refused to disclose the assailant's name to the victim, citing a blanket application of the General Data Protection Regulation (GDPR). This action has stalled the police investigation, leaving the suspect unlocated and the victim entirely disenfranchised and unprotected. Pharmacological discrepancies and the absence of rapid tranquilization. So in a secure PICU setting, acute, dangerous and physical violence is typically met with immediate pharmacological containment to prevent further harm to patients and staff. Detained service users often expect that highly violent individuals will be immediately sedated with cyclopenthic acufase, commonly marketed as Clopixol acufase. Clopixol is a brand name of cyclopenthiol, an injectable, typical first-generation antipsychotic containing an active ingredient, cyclopenthiol acetate. This medication is known to cause severe muscle stiffness and extrapyramidal side effects, which physically restrict a patient's motor control and limit their physical ability to inflict violence. An analysis of clinical guidelines, however, reveals a complex tension between patient expectations and standard psychiatric practices. So in the first column, you've got clinical parameters, primary indications, perinatal agents used, onset of action, suitability for rapid tranq, and clinical limitations. And it says that the clinical parameter in this instance would be standard rapid tranquilization protocol. Primary indication should have been urgent sedation of a highly aroused, agitated or aggressive patient to minimize the risk. Perinatal agents used, intramuscular benzodiazepines for example lorazepam, or standard antipsychotics like haloperidol. Onset of action, so rapidly, typically within minutes, designated for immediate crises, suitable for rapid tranq, recommended as first-line emergency containment. Clinical limitations, short duration of action, requires close post-dose psychological monitoring. While standard clinical guidelines dictate that cyclopenthiol acufase should be reserved as a last resort for long-term behavioural disturbance and not used as an immediate emergency sedative, the hospital's failure to administer any form of rapid tranq or clinical containment during a sustained 25-punch assault represents a catastrophic clinical failure. Under the NICE guideline NG10, when verbal de-escalation fails and a patient exhibits violent physical aggression, staff are expected to act immediately using a proportionate combination of physical restraint, seclusion, and fast-acting rapid tranquilization to ensure patient safety. By doing nothing, the clinical team allowed the predictable and preventable assault to occur. So failures in observation, supervision and separation protocols. Under Chapter 26 of the Mental Health Act Code of Practice, hospital managers and clinical staff are mandated to maintain a safe environment and implemented structured observation levels that correspond directly to a patient's risk profile. When a patient demonstrates severe verbal and physical aggression, their risk assessment must be escalated immediately and their observation status must be increased by continuous or multi-professional levels. You get put on a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1, it's called. It's basically when somebody has to follow you around the whole time, making sure that you don't smack anybody else or start gobbing off and chucking drinks and behaving like a total twat. The ward management failed to implement any of the structured observation levels required to mitigate the assailant's violence. So there's a chart here, I can't really be fucked to read it. Rather than placing the assailant under a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 continuous supervision order where support workers follow the aggressive patient 24 hours a day to intervene in any further violence, the ward manager permitted the assailant to roam the unit freely. Furthermore, the decision to relocate the assailant to a bedroom directly adjacent to the victim's room directly violated the guiding principles of the Mental Health Act, which dictate the patients must be treated in a safe physical and psychological environment that minimises restrictions on liberty while maximising personal safety. So verbatim statutory and regulatory breaches. The hospital's operational administrative failures constitute multiple direct breaches of primary and secondary English legislation, as well as professional codes of conduct. So the first one is the Health and Social Care Act, the executive regulator in England, the Care Quality Commission, enforces the regulated activity regulations. The hospital's total failure to protect the victim from an active assault and the subsequent mismanagement of the ward environment represents severe breaches of regulations 12 and 13. So breach of regulation 12, self-care and treatment, the verbatim text of regulation 12.1 mandates reads, care and treatment must be provided in a safe way for service users. Another bit of that legislation says that assessing the risks to health and safety of service users of receiving the care or treatment and stipulates they should do all that's reasonably practicable to mitigate any such risks, ensure the person providing the care or treatment to service users have the qualifications, competence, skills and experience to do so safely. By standing by during an active physical assault, failing to separate the patients and failing to reassess and mitigate the risk post-incident, the hospital failed to do what was reasonably practicable to keep the victim safe. Under CQC enforcement policies, breach of regulation 12 is a prosecutable criminal offence if it results in avoidable harm or exposes a service user to significant risk of harm. So breach of regulation 13, safeguarding and service users from abuse and improper treatment. So that legislation says that service users must be protected from abuse and improper treatment in accordance with this regulation, which state that systems and processes must be established to operate effectively to prevent abuse of service users and to investigate and immediately, upon becoming aware of any allegation or evidence of such abuse. It goes on to say ill treatment, whether physical or psychological nature, of a service user or neglect of a service user, leaving a detained patient exposed to violent physical beating and subsequently placing the attacker in the adjacent bedroom opposite next door bedroom represents a severe form of psychological ill treatment and systemic neglect. Then you've got the NMC code 2018, every registered nurse on the ward is personally and professionally accountable to the NMC to uphold the standards of patient care, safety and professionalism. Passive failure of nursing staff to intervene during this violent assault violates the core principles of the NMC code, which it says verbatim here, make their care and safety your main concern and make sure that their dignity is preserved and their needs are recognised, assessed and responded to. Then you've got another bit that says act without delay if you believe there's a risk to patient safety or public protection, and another bit that says raise concerns immediately if you believe a person is vulnerable or at risk or needs extra support and protection. The staff's decision to watch a physical escalation unfold without acting and their subsequent failure to establish immediate post-incident safeguarding represents professional misconduct that directly compromises their fitness to practice. You've also got Human Rights Act 98 and the right to safety. under English common law and the Human Rights Act 1998, a psychiatric hospital holding a detained patient under the Mental Health Act owes a strict operational obligation to protect that individual's physical integrity. The operational obligation to protect life, Article 2 ECHR, as established in Savage versus South Essex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust precedent in 2008, public authorities and hospital staff have an operational obligation to take active preventative steps to protect detained patients who are under the state's absolute control and are highly vulnerable to violence, abuse and exploitation within a closed institution. And you've got protecting against degrading treatment. So under Article 3, the state and its clinical proxies are strictly prohibited from subjecting individuals to or permitting them to be subject to inhuman or degrading treatment. Allowing a patient to be punched 25 times while locked in a secure unit constitutes a substantive failure to protect against degrading and inhuman treatment. The GDPR fallacy, obstructing justice under a pseudo-legal shield. So following the assault, the hospital administration refused to provide the victim with the assailant's actual name, citing that GDPR clauses. This justification represents a severe and likely misapplication of data protection laws. Data protection legislation in the United Kingdom is designed to safeguard personal privacy, but it contains explicit mandatory exemptions to prevent it from being used to shield criminal behaviour or obstruct law enforcement. The hospital's refusal to disclose the perpetrator's identity directly conflicts with the several statutory exemptions in the Data Protection Act 2018. One of them is Crime and Taxation Exemption, the verbatim of text of Schedule 2, Part 1, Paragraph 2 of DPA 2018 exempts personal data from UK GDPR's non-disclosure provisions where the data is processed for the purposes of the prevention or detection of crime or the apprehension or prosecution of offenders. But they don't give a fuck about that because they're cunts. By refusing to share the assailant's name with the victim and failing to coordinate a swift discharge with the police, the hospital actively impeded the apprehension and prosecution of a violent offender. Safeguarding exemption, Schedule 1, Part 2, Paragraph 18. This provision allows for the processing and sharing of sensitive personal data, including criminal offence data, without the individual's consent if it's in the substantial public interest and is necessary for the safeguarding of individuals at risk. The victim's right to pursue civil remedies or for clinical negligence, personal injury and psychological trauma requires access to the perpetrator's identity. Using GDPR to withhold the information from a severely injured victim while simultaneously executing a hasty, uncoordinated discharge that prevented the police from locating the suspect strongly suggested a deliberate administrative effort to shield the hospital from regulatory scrutiny and legal liability. Psychosocial betrayal and the institutional disenfranchisement. The clinical and administrative actions of the hospital have had a devastating emotional and psychological impact on the victim. Detained psychiatric units, patients exist in a state of absolute reliance on their clinical custodians. They're deprived of their liberty under law, and when locked in the ward, ostensibly a place of safety, becomes a site of unopposed brutal violence. The fundamental therapeutic alliance is shattered. The hospital's post-incident behaviour has left the victim feeling intensely vulnerable, that's me, and completely disenfranchised. So this guy knows I'm trying to put him in prison and he's out in the community, and he'd probably do quite a bit of time for what he did on that, which is being reviewed by the CCTV, being reviewed by the police as we speak. Placing the attacker in the bedroom directly adjacent to the victim's room forced the victim to live in a state of constant acute terror, actively compounding their trauma. Definitely made me feel worse, more vulnerable, like he was at the other end of the ward and the ward manager moved him into the room next door to mine. Furthermore, the smoking gun nature of the assailant's discharge, the fact that he just disappeared as soon as I mentioned it online, occurring within 90 minutes of the victim disclosing the narrative on YouTube, demonstrates an institution operating with profound corruption, ineptitude and unprofessionalism. Rather than executing a structured risk-assessed clinical discharge or cooperating with law enforcement, the ward manager prioritised reputational damage control by discharging the attacker into the community via patient transport without informing the police. The hospital compromised public safety and left the victim completely abandoned, with the police unable to locate the suspect and the hospital withholding his name. The victim has been stripped of their right to legal justice and left deeply disenfranchised by the very institution legally mandated to protect him. One of the things this guy did about an hour afterwards is he stood up in between a couple of staff users and me and started pelvic thrusting like this, saying how he'd be fucking my sister Lily Allen and he didn't give a fuck and that he deserved it. You can find that on the CCTV if you really want to go through. That will be captured on the CCTV. It was about an hour after the incident. He openly admitted having raped my half-sister Lily Allen on the ward and was sort of glorifying and mocking his actions in a sort of devil-may-care, revolting and despicable manner before he disappeared in a puff of smoke. So fuck Cygnet, fuck him, and yeah, fuck it.